Those words were the last thing anyone expected to hear inside a hospital corridor, least of all from a man whose wife had just been told her mother might not survive the night. Elliot Cross, the 41-year-old lead architect at Harrow and Wynn Development Group, said them anyway. He stood near the vending machines at the end of the cardiac unit hallway, his voice low but not low enough. He had his phone pressed to his ear and his back to the room where his wife's mother lay, connected to 3 machines and a prayer. The fluorescent light above him buzzed once, like even the ceiling could not believe what it was hearing. "After this week we move forward," he said. "She'll be too consumed by grief to notice anything. This is the right time." Nora Wynne Cross, the 36-year-old wife of Elliot and silent majority owner of Harrow and Wynn Development Group, stood in the doorway of her mother's room with a paper cup of cold coffee in one hand and her father's old cardigan folded over her other arm. She had stepped out to get him something warm to drink. She had been gone less than 4 minutes. She heard every word. She did not drop the coffee. She did not make a sound. She only stood very still, the way a person stands when the ground beneath them has shifted but has not yet decided whether to open entirely. Then Elliot turned around and saw her. His expression did not flood with guilt. It filled with something worse, calculation. "I'll call you back," he said into the phone and slid it into his pocket. Nora looked at him for a long moment. "Your father's tea is on the nurse's station," she said. "I forgot to bring it." She turned and walked back into her mother's room without another word. That was not the beginning of the story. It was the end of the part where she still believed she was wrong about him. Nora had not always kept secrets from Elliot. In the first 2 years of their marriage, she had tried to tell him everything. The company structure, the trust documents, the way her parents had built Harrow and Wynn from a single construction bid on a county road project in rural Ohio into one of the most respected private development firms in the mid-Atlantic. She had tried twice to sit down with him and explain that the title she carried inside the company was not the modest one printed on her business card. He had waved her off both times. "Your parents handle that stuff," he had said the first time, scrolling through project renderings on his tablet. "You don't need to understand every line of the trust." The second time he had laughed. Not unkindly, just dismissively, the way people laugh when they assume someone is overcomplicating something simple. "Nora, you handle the charitable arm, that's meaningful work. Let your father keep the business side." So she had let him believe that. Partly because correcting him felt exhausting, partly because her father had warned her, years before she met Elliot, that power had a way of changing how people saw you, and not always for the better. But mostly because she had noticed, somewhere around the end of their first year together, that Elliot was most comfortable when he believed he was the more important person in the room. She had loved him enough to let him have that. She was not sure when love had quietly become accommodation. Nora Wynne had grown up inside the company the same way some children grow up inside churches or kitchens. Harrow and Wynne was not just her parents' business. It was the place where her mother, Ottoline Wynne, had sketched the first site plans on a diner napkin. It was the conference room where her father, Herbert Wynne, had shaken hands with a city councilman who told him no one from their county had ever built anything worth bidding on. It was the filing cabinet in the back office where Nora, at age 14, had learned to read a land contract. Her parents had never planned to make her the majority owner. That had happened because of a tax structure Milo Prentice, their longtime attorney, had designed when Nora was 22 and just finished her graduate degree in urban planning. At the time, it was meant as an inheritance protection, a sealed corporate arrangement through a holding entity called Wynn Anchor LLC. Her name controlled the majority stake without appearing on any public filing that a casual observer would find. Elliot had joined the firm 7 years ago as a project architect. He was talented and charming and very certain of his own vision. He had worked his way to lead architect in 4 years, which was faster than anyone expected. He had also, somewhere in those 4 years, developed the quiet belief that Harrow and Wynn's future ran through him. When he and Nora had started dating, some people on the internal team had raised an eyebrow. Milo had raised both of his. "People can change when they find out what you are," Milo had said in his careful way. Nora had said she trusted Elliot. Milo had not argued. He had only closed his folder. Her mother's name was Ottoline Wynne, and she had been sick for 8 months before the cardiac episode that brought her to St. Marcus Regional 3 weeks before the incident in the hallway. Herbert had fallen ill 2 months earlier. Separate diagnoses, same terrible timing, as if her parents had always agreed on everything and could not be persuaded to stop now. Nora had been driving between the hospital and her parents' house and the Harrow and Wynne offices for 6 weeks straight by the time Elliot spoke those words into his phone. She had not slept a full night since October. She had been surviving on cold coffee, her father's bad jokes and Petra Dane's presence. Petra Dane, the 39-year-old chief operations officer of Harrow and Wynne, and one of the few people inside the company who knew the full structure of Wynne Anchor, had been Nora's closest ally since Nora joined the firm officially at 25. Petra was quiet, observant, and loyal, in the way that only people who had watched powerful families weather real storms could be. She did not confuse efficiency with coldness. She cried at the right moments and worked twice as hard afterward. She was also the one who had first noticed the expense discrepancies. 3 days before Nora heard Elliot in the hallway, Petra had called her from the operations floor on a Tuesday evening. "I need you to see something," she said. "Not over the phone." Nora had driven back to the office after visiting hours ended. The building was nearly empty. The parking garage echoed. In the small glass-walled conference room on the third floor, Petra had spread 4 printed reports across the table. She placed a hand on the first one. "These are consulting invoices from the past 5 months," she said. "They're being routed through the Stonebridge development account." Nora looked at the line items. Consulting, advisory, strategic communications, all approved under Elliot's project authorization. "Who are the consultants?" Nora asked. Petra placed a second page beside the first, a vendor registration form for a company called Tier 1 Advisory Partners. "Registered 4 months ago. Primary contact. Sloan Vickers." Nora recognized the name. Sloan Vickers, the 33-year-old external communications director that Elliot had brought in for the Stonebridge residential tower campaign. She had met Sloan twice at project events. Both times, Elliot had stood slightly too close to her and laughed slightly too long at things that were not quite funny enough. "What does Tier 1 Advisory actually do?" Nora asked. Petra's face was careful. "As far as I can tell, very little. The deliverables listed are vague. Strategy consultation, brand positioning, media readiness." She paused. "There is no website. The registered address is a milk service in Arlington." Nora sat down. "There's more," Petra said. The third page was a procurement approval chain. Several large vendor invoices had been authorized using project development discretion, a category that allowed senior architects and project leads to approve expenses under a certain threshold without secondary review. Elliot had structured a series of approvals just below the review threshold, each 1 week apart. The total across 5 months was substantial. The fourth page was an internal calendar export. Elliot's block calendar time, labeled client development, overlapped repeatedly with Sloan's event appearances across the city. Nora looked at the 4 pages for a long time. Something inside her did not need to be told what it meant. She had already suspected it in a quiet place she had refused to visit. "Does anyone else know about this?" she asked. "Not yet," Petra said. "I came to you first." Nora folded her hands on the table. Outside the glass wall, the office was dark. "Don't touch anything," she said. "Don't flag it. Don't forward it. Don't say anything to anyone on the floor. Leave it exactly where it sits." Petra nodded. "And pull every invoice Sloan Vickers has touched since she signed the first contract." It was Declan Rock, the 44-year-old head of internal compliance at Harrow and Wynne, who found the deeper problem. Nora had called him in quietly the next morning. Declan was methodical and had the specific kind of patience that came from spending 15 years reviewing contracts that other people hoped no one would ever read carefully. He did not flinch at bad news. He organized it. Within 24 hours, he had found something that went beyond expense manipulation. He called Nora and Petra into the same third-floor conference room. "There's a project," he said, setting a folder on the table. "It's called the Meridian Ridge Proposal. It's an early-stage mixed-use development, residential, retail, structured public green space." He opened the folder. It came into the firm 18 months ago through an unsolicited pitch from a young urban planning consultant. His name is Jasper Okafor. Nora recognized the name only vaguely. A proposal submission. She had seen it in a quarterly review summary. "The firm passed on it internally," Declan continued. "But the proposal was never formally declined in writing. The submission just went quiet." He placed a second document beside the first, an early-stage rendering package for Stonebridge Tower. The flagship project Elliot had been leading for the past 14 months. The project that had been positioned as his defining achievement. The design that trade publications were already calling a turning point for the firm. Nora looked at the 2 documents side by side. The structural concept was different. The materials language was different. But the social infrastructure model at the heart of both designs, the organizing principle of how residential density was arranged around public gathering space, and the specific community access philosophy that had made Stonebridge distinctive, was not different. It was the same idea, expressed in different architectural vocabulary by someone with more resources and a larger platform. Jasper Okafor had submitted the original concept. Elliot's team had built a celebrated career moment on top of it. Petra sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling. Declan's voice remained even. Jasper submitted a formal inquiry to the firm 6 weeks ago, asking about the status of his proposal and whether the Meridian Ridge concept had been incorporated into any active project. The inquiry was routed to Elliot's office. It was never answered. Nora did not speak for a moment. Her mother had a saying she used inside the firm in the early years, when they were still the kind of company that had to fight to be taken seriously. She had said it to Nora at least a dozen times. A company that steals an idea has not gained a project. It has traded its name for someone else's work and will spend years wondering why the foundation feels wrong. Nora looked at the Meridian Ridge proposal, then at the Stonebridge renderings. "Find Jasper Okafor," she said. "Tell him someone from the firm would like to speak with him. Don't tell him more than that. Be careful." The night Nora's mother was moved to the cardiac unit, Elliot arrived at the hospital 40 minutes after Nora called him. Not because of traffic. She had seen the timestamp on his location share, which he had forgotten she had access to. He had been in the same neighborhood as Sloane Vickers' apartment building at the time of her call. He had arrived at the hospital smelling faintly of something she did not want to name. He had held Ottoline's hand for 12 minutes. Nora had counted. Then he had gone to make calls in the hallway, and Nora had sat between her parents' 2 beds in the same unit, her mother in one and her father 2 rooms down. And she had held herself very still and thought about the letter her father had pressed into her hand 3 weeks earlier. Herbert Wynne, 71, the co-founder of Harrow and Wynne and Nora's first teacher in the meaning of a handshake, had written it on a yellow legal pad in the careful block letters he used when he wanted something to be read and not skimmed. She had not opened it yet. He had told her she would know when. She opened it the night after she heard Elliot in the hallway. She sat in the parking garage of St. Marcus Regional, in the driver's seat, with the engine off, her mother's hospital bracelet still sitting on the center console from when Ottoline had asked her to hold it during a procedure earlier that day. The letter was 2 pages. The first line read, "You were not raised to be large in loud rooms, Nora. You were raised to build rooms that last." She read it twice. Then she sat in the quiet for a long time. Her father had not written it to predict anything. He had written it years ago, she could tell from the fold creases, and had carried it until recently. He wrote about the company not as a possession, but as a responsibility. He wrote about what Harrow and Wynne was actually for, not profit, not prestige, but the belief that good development changed neighborhoods, and that people who built things had an obligation to the communities being built around them. He wrote one paragraph that she read 4 times. "If anyone ever uses what we built to take from someone smaller than them, stop it. Not because the company is ours, because it was never only ours. It belongs to everyone whose neighborhood it touched." She folded the letter back along its creases. Then she called Milo Prentice. Milo Prentice, the 66-year-old senior attorney of Wynne Anchor LLC, and the only person outside of Nora's parents who had known the full ownership structure from the beginning, answered on the second ring. He listened without interrupting. When Nora finished, he was quiet for 4 seconds. "How much has he seen?" he asked. "He knows I handle the charitable arm," she said. "He's never looked further." Another brief silence. "Does he know about Wynne Anchor specifically?" "No." She heard Milo exhale slowly, always did when a situation was serious but manageable. "All right. Then here is what we do not do. We do not contact him. We do not warn him. We do not move anything that would register as unusual activity inside the company before we have a complete picture." "Petra has the invoices," Nora said. "Declan has the Meridian Ridge documents." "Get Jasper Okafor into a room with outside counsel before the end of the week," Milo said, quietly. "Do not use the main conference room." "There's an event coming up," Nora said, "the Stonebridge celebration dinner. It's in 11 days. The firm invited investors, city officials, the media partners who've been covering the project. Elliot has been planning his remarks for 2 months. Milo was quiet again. "And the full board?" he asked. Nora said, 3 of them are longtime allies of my father. 2 are neutral. 1, a man named Porter Aldis, has been positioning himself against the Wynne family trust for years. He sees Elliot as his preferred path to restructuring the board. "Porter Aldis," Milo repeated. "He was at the groundbreaking for Stonebridge. He stood next to Elliot the entire time." Milo set something down on his desk. "Then we need to be very careful about timing. If Aldis suspects anything is coming, he will move to protect Elliot and frame whatever the firm does as a personal dispute. A divorce narrative." "I know," Nora said. "The event gives us a room full of the right people," Milo said. Nora looked at the hospital bracelet on the console. "That's what I was thinking," she said. Jasper Okafor was 29 years old, and he met Nora in a small rented conference room at a law office 3 blocks from the Harrow and Wynne building. He brought his original submission materials in a worn canvas tote bag, printed drafts, digital timestamps, an email chain with a junior associate at the firm who had acknowledged receipt of the Meridian Ridge proposal 18 months ago and then gone entirely silent. He laid it out on the table with the careful deliberateness of someone who had rehearsed the order many times alone, hoping someone would one day sit across from him and look. Nora looked. Milo sat beside her. An outside attorney named Cecily Tran, the 45-year-old specialist in intellectual property and construction law who Milo had recommended, sat across from Jasper. Jasper's voice was steady, but his hands were not. He was an urban planning consultant who had spent 4 years building a proposal he believed in. He had grown up in a neighborhood that had been developed badly. Streets planned without thinking about who actually walked them. Parks placed where they looked good on a map rather than where families could reach them. Meridian Ridge had been his attempt to describe what that neighborhood could have been. "I didn't think I'd get a response," he said. "Firms like Harrow and Wynn don't usually return proposals from consultants without established relationships." He looked at the table. "But when I saw the Stonebridge coverage, I knew. The language they used to describe the public access philosophy, the phrasing about residential density as a social bridge, those aren't common ideas in that combination. I wrote those." Cecily reviewed the time-stamped files without speaking. Her expression did not give anything away, which Nora had learned was usually a sign that something was giving her a great deal to consider. After 20 minutes, Cecily looked up. "The submission is dated, authenticated, and materially distinct from what Harrow and Wynn's Stonebridge materials show as their internal origin point," she said. "If any part of the Stonebridge concept was derived from Mr. Okafor's work without credit or compensation, the firm has an obligation to address it." Jasper looked at Nora. He seemed unsure whether to hope. "My parents built this company to protect people like you," Nora said. "Not from this table. Not like this." She paused. "I'm sorry it took this long to reach you." His chin moved slightly. He nodded once. She placed one hand on his file, the same way her mother used to place a hand on the drafting table when she wanted someone to know she was serious. "We will not release this project under false authorship," Nora said. "That is not a negotiation." Elliot had no idea any of this was happening. He was finishing his remarks for the Stonebridge dinner. He had written them over 3 evenings in the study, and Nora had seen the pages on his desk once, face down, when she came in to find a phone charger. She had not read them. She did not need to. She knew what they would say. Vision, instinct, what it meant to build something from the ground up when no one believed you could. Sloane Vickers had been quietly removed from the firm's active vendor list 2 days after Petra compiled the full invoice record. It was done through an administrative update and not flagged as anything unusual. Sloane did not know yet that the shell company payments had been documented. She did not know that the approval chain had been preserved by Declan in a sealed file under board review. Porter Aldis had received a legal committee notice requesting records related to the Stonebridge project's early development approvals. The notice was politely worded. Milo had designed it to look like routine pre-event compliance review. Porter had called Elliot from his car after reading it. "Someone is asking questions about Stonebridge," he said. Elliot had laughed. "Pre-event paperwork. Legal always does this before a major public moment. It asked about early development concept origins," Porter said. Elliot's pause was brief. "That's standard IP coverage." Porter had not pushed further, but he had also not sounded convinced. In a downtown hotel room, Sloane Vickers had been reading the same notice, forwarded to her by a contact inside the firm. She had called Elliot immediately. "This isn't standard," she said. "You are overreacting," he said. "Elliot." Her voice was flat. "I know what this looks like. Nothing is happening," he said. "Nora is at the hospital every other night. She doesn't have the capacity right now to pay attention to anything else." The call ended. Across the city, in her parents' house, Nora was sitting at the same desk where Herbert had written her letter, reading the final legal authorization Milo had prepared. She wore her mother's pearl earrings. She wore her father's watch under her sleeve. She picked up the pen. The Stonebridge celebration dinner was held in the glass event space on the 14th floor of a building Harrow and Wynn had completed 3 years earlier, floor-to-ceiling windows. The city spread out below, like a map of everything the firm had touched. Investors sat at long tables with white linens. City officials occupied the center. Media partners stood near the window wall. Senior employees filled the perimeter seating. Elliot arrived with Sloane. He had not told Nora this would happen. He had sent her a text that afternoon saying she should not come, that the dinner was a professional event, and given her parents' condition, it would look better for her to be at the hospital. He had ended the message with the word optics, which said more about him than any of the invoices had. Nora read the message. She looked at her signed authorization. Then she drove to the event space and entered through a side access door using a credential that was not on the guest list Elliot had approved. It said, Win Anchor LLC, active chair. No one stopped her. The three employees who saw her in the hallway nodded the way people nod when they understand, on some level, that a room belongs to a person even when no sign has told them so. Petra was already inside with a tablet. Declan stood near the presentation board. Milo was seated at a side table with Cecily. Jasper Okafor was seated at the back near a staff door, his hands clasped, his folder beside him. Nora stood near the back wall and watched Elliot cross the room. He worked it beautifully. He shook every hand with the right pressure and the right duration. He touched Sloane's arm in the small, proprietary way that people do when they want observers to draw a conclusion without having to say it. He found Porter Aldous near the bar, and they exchanged a few words that both of them seemed to find satisfying. Then he looked toward the back of the room and saw Nora. His expression did not collapse. It hardened. He crossed toward her with a lowered voice and a social smile still fixed in place for anyone watching. "I told you not to come," he said. Nora looked at him calmly. "I never said I wouldn't. This is not the place for whatever you're right," she said. "This isn't the place for what I wanted to say to you privately." She looked past him toward the room. "But it's exactly the right place for what the firm needs to say publicly." He stared at her. "Elliot." Porter Aldous appeared at his shoulder, eyes moving between them quickly. Nora looked at Porter. "You'll want to sit down," she said. Not unkindly, just with the certainty of someone who had already counted the chairs. Porter opened his mouth. Then something in her expression made him close it. Tiberius Ray, the 52-year-old president of the Greater Columbus Investors Council, who was seated at the center table, had attended 6 Harrow and Win events over 9 years. He later told colleague that the moment the presentation screen changed was the moment he understood. The dinner was not what anyone had been told it would be. The room was still settling after the salad course when the Win Anchor legal seal appeared on the screen. Not the Stonebridge logo, not Elliot's opening slide. The legal seal of Win Anchor LLC, followed by the words, "Before tonight's remarks, Harrow and Win Development Group is required to address formal findings connected to the Stonebridge Tower project." Elliot stood near the front. The color drained from his face in a way that was visible from 3 tables away. Sloane sat very still. Porter Aldous picked up his water glass and did not set it back down. The first document was the consulting invoice chain. Hotel charges billed to the Stonebridge Development account under Creative Consultation. Vendor payments to Tier 1 Advisory Partners, a shell entity. Breakdown of payments to a media contact for undisclosed reputation management. A murmur moved through the room. The second section was the Meridian Ridge comparison. Jasper Okafor's original proposal, timestamped, authenticated, submitted to the firm 18 months ago. Beside it, key conceptual language from the Stonebridge design materials, the organizing philosophy, the community access model, the specific framing of residential space as social infrastructure. Side by side, the 2 documents said what no one in the room needed Nora to explain. Someone near the media section said quietly, "That's the same idea." The third section appeared. Financial authorizations signed under Elliot's production account. Procurement approval structured below review threshold. Porter Aldous's name on 3 board correspondence items where early Stonebridge expense concerns had been raised and dismissed without documentation. Porter set down his glass, hard. Elliot moved toward the projection booth in the corner. "Stop this," he said. His voice was controlled but thin. "This is a private firm event. You cannot." "It is a Harrow and Win event," Nora said from the side of the room. Her voice carried without effort the way her mother's always had when Ottoline stopped performing patience and simply told the truth. Harrow and Win is a Win Anchor entity. Win Anchor's active chair authorized this presentation through the Board Ethics Committee and outside legal counsel 2 days ago. Elliot turned to look at her. The room turned too. "You have no authority here," he said. The sentence was so certain and so wrong that for a moment no one spoke. Milo rose from his table. "Win Anchor LLC holds majority controlling interest in Harrow and Win Development Group. That position transfers to Nora Wynne Cross under the terms of the Wynne Family Trust instrument executed 7 years ago." He paused. "She has had authority here since before you were hired." Elliot looked at Nora. The calculation that had lived in his face for years was gone. Something raw replaced it. Not shame, not yet. Something more like the specific terror of a person who has pulled what they believed was a loose thread and discovered it was holding the entire structure together. "You kept this from me," he said. Nora looked at him steadily. "You never asked who I was," she said. "You decided what I was worth and stopped there." Sloane stood from her chair. "He told me she was a liability," she said. The words came out before she seemed to intend them. The room heard her. Milo stepped forward with a sealed envelope. He placed it in Elliot's hand without ceremony. "Effective as of this evening," Milo said. "Your project lead status is suspended pending the board's formal review. Your access to Stonebridge materials and the firm's development accounts has been frozen. Outside counsel will contact your attorney regarding expense recovery, intellectual property claims, and contract violations." A second envelope went to Porter Aldis. He took it without looking up. A third was carried to where Sloane stood. Elliot stared at the envelope in his hand for a long time. When he looked up, his eyes were wet, but Nora had watched him cry on purpose before, at the right moments for the right audiences, and she was no longer able to tell the difference. "Nora," he said quietly now, "we can talk about this." She looked at the envelope, then at the room, then at Jasper Okafor sitting near the back with his hands no longer trembling. She walked to where Jasper sat. She stood beside him and addressed the room. Jasper Okafor submitted the concept that became the intellectual foundation of the Stonebridge project 18 months ago, she said. Harrow and Wynne did not credit him, did not contact him, did not compensate him. The firm is suspending all public claims associated with the Stonebridge design until authorship, credit, and rights are formally corrected. She paused. The project will not be celebrated while someone else's name is missing from it. The room was very quiet. Then one of the city officials stood and began to clap. She did not know all of what had just happened, but she knew enough. Someone in the employee section joined in, then another, then the back of the room, then the investor tables, until the applause moved forward and filled the space that Elliot had spent months imagining would belong to him. He stood in the middle of it, ruined by the audience he had curated, witnessed by every person he had wanted most to impress. Porter Aldis sat with both hands flat on the table, looking at the document Milo had given him, as if reading it twice could change what it said. Sloane left through a side door. The cameras near the window wall caught the angle of her exit. Elliot did not move for a long time. He looked at Nora once more across the space between them, and she did not look away. But she did not move toward him either. She had nothing left that she owed him. In the weeks after, things moved in the way that institutional things move when the structure beneath them has been properly documented. Elliot's suspension became a formal separation from the firm. The expense recovery claim was filed. Sloane's shell company was referred to outside counsel. Porter Aldis resigned from the board before the ethics committee could schedule its review. The Stonebridge project was formally restructured. Jasper Okafor's name was placed in the authorship record, and the firm announced that the redesigned project would be presented at a spring development conference under its corrected credit. Jasper sat across from Nora at a conference table with a revised contract in front of him, and when he picked up the pen, his hands were steady. The week after the dinner, Ottiline Wynne was moved out of the cardiac unit and into a step-down room with a window that faced the courtyard garden. She was not well, but she was more present. Herbert had been moved to a rehabilitation facility 2 floors down. Nora visited them both every morning before coming to the office. She brought her father bad coffee from the cart in the lobby because he complained about the hospital brand, and she found that she loved listening to him complain. She sat with her mother for an hour each afternoon and sometimes did not say anything at all, just held her hand and watched the light change in the window. One afternoon, Ottiline opened her eyes and looked at her daughter. "Is the firm all right?" she asked. "Yes," Nora said. Ottiline studied her face for a moment. "And you?" Nora thought about the question honestly, which was something she had not always done. "Getting there," she said. Her mother squeezed her hand once and went back to sleep. Nora stopped using the side entrance after that. She came through the main lobby, past the glass wall, with the company name etched in clean serif letters that her father had chosen because he said a name should be readable from a distance. Employees she passed in the hallway nodded, not because she asked them to, not because anyone announced her arrival, but because people recognize the difference between someone who occupies a room and someone who has earned it. She wore no titles visibly. She carried no pronouncements. Only her father's watch on her wrist and her mother's earrings at her ears, and the name that Elliot had never thought to investigate. In the private conference room on the 3rd floor, the one with the view of the city, she stood alone for a few minutes before a meeting began. She looked out at the skyline, the buildings her parents had touched, the neighborhoods that had been changed by decisions made in this office. She pressed her palm flat against the glass, the way she used to do as a child, when she thought no one was watching. Her father had told her once that every building was a sentence in a longer story, and that the best builders understood they were not the authors of that story, only its careful stewards. She understood that now in a way she had not before. Some things only become clear after the noise leaves the room, after the person who filled all the space with certainty and easy smiles has finally quietly gone. What remains is not emptiness. What remains is everything that was always there, patient and unmoved, waiting to be seen by someone who finally had the courage to look.